Hello. My name is Kaylin Blythe. And 5 minutes before this family barbecue, my father called me delusional. 7 minutes later, command issued a red tier order. Funny thing is they still thought the biggest explosion that day would be the fireworks. They were wrong. The heat pressed against the back of my neck like a hand that wouldn't let go. Georgia in May wasn't gentle, it clung, especially when everything inside you begged for space to breathe. Under the white canopy strung over folding chairs, iced lemonade in glass pitchers caught the sun. Flags flapped politely. From a distance, we looked like a Norman Rockwell painting. Smiling. Civil, American. But inside, something meaner stirred. I sat 2 seats away from the buffet table, my glass sweating in my hand. The condensation slid down to my wrist like a warning. Around me, the conversations were bright, updates on grandkids, job promotions, beach homes, PDA nominations. My sister Isolde glided through them all like a seasoned politician. She was every bit the center of gravity she always claimed to be. Have you seen her page? Someone asked. She just hit 30,000 followers on her wellness blog. She's so poised, another added. A real role model. I said nothing. I rarely did. That was my role, background. The quiet one. The one who left home, didn't explain much, and returned only when summoned. Then, someone made the mistake of noticing me. So, Kaylin, what are you up to these days? It was Aunt Rosemary, the one with 3 toy poodles and a husband who never remembered my name. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile. I'm still active duty. Tier 1 operations. It was a sentence meant to land quietly, like a pebble in a still pond. Instead, it detonated. Isolde leaned back in her seat with a grin too wide to be kind. Wait, Tier 1? As in Special Forces? The way she said it didn't carry curiosity. It carried theater. She looked me up and down. No way you're Special Forces. I mean, seriously, look at you. Laughter erupted like someone had dropped the punchline. Someone clapped. A cousin snorted. A wine glass clinked. I held my breath, not out of surprise, but out of habit. Because this was familiar. Predictable. Then my father walked over, his presence slicing through the din like a sharp wind. He wasn't laughing. That would have been better. He rested one hand on the back of my chair and spoke just loud enough for everyone to hear. Stop deluding yourself, Kaylin, he said. You've always had this imagination. There it was. Not a slap. But a slow, deliberate burial. My grip tightened on my glass. My knuckles paled. The heat of the lemonade pressed against my palm, and for a moment, I imagined the entire thing shattering. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just listened to the silence behind the laughter, the part where no one came to my defense. The sound of erasure isn't loud. It's quiet. A decision made behind closed mouths and polite smiles. I heard echoes of childhood. Girls don't wear camo. Act like your sister. Put down the toy gun. It's not ladylike. Those weren't suggestions. They were edits. Small deletions, one after another, until I became unrecognizable to them, and eventually, to myself. I kept my eyes on the canopy above us, watching a moth struggle against the plastic netting. Even it was trying to escape. The laughter waned, replaced by refilling drinks and the sound of someone passing around paper napkins. But inside me, the noise built. They saluted soldiers every year, stood up for the anthem, placed flags on the porch, but they wouldn't claim the one who'd come from their own house. My gaze drifted to the edge of the lawn. The flagpole stood tall, the cloth snapping with each gust. Gerald put it up every Memorial Day. Said it was his way of honoring the country. And yet here I sat. Unseen. Undone. My hand slipped into my blazer pocket. I wasn't reaching for anything in particular, just grounding myself. That's when I felt the buzz. A small vibration. Subtle. Sharp. I glanced down. My phone screen lit up. Emergency order. Red tier clearance. Assemble immediately. The timing made me nauseous. The irony made me steady. I held the screen against my thigh, keeping it out of view. No one noticed. Of course they didn't. I stared at it, breathing slowly. They wouldn't believe what I said. So they'd have to believe what I did next. The phone was back in my jacket pocket, screen dimmed, orders hidden. No one saw. No one asked. And I didn't offer. Sunlight slipped behind the pine trees, casting a golden filter over everything, the plastic cups, the white folding chairs, even the sheen on Isolde's hair. The backyard looked staged now. Like someone had curated it for a lifestyle magazine. Southern Summer Grace, or some nonsense like that. But this wasn't Grace. It was a staged memory in motion. One I had no say in. My heels shifted slightly in the grass as the sound of forks tapping on paper plates drifted through the air. I wasn't hungry. I hadn't been since the moment my father told me I had an imagination problem. I'd heard that before. It wasn't a new wound, it was a reopened one. I scanned the lawn, spotting Isolde near the fire pit, holding court again, telling a story that had too many hand gestures to be true. They always laughed for her. Even when she lied, they clapped. Especially then. My mind drifted, not because I was distracted, but because the ache pulled me backward. 12 years old. End-of-year award ceremony. I had spent the entire semester building the science project myself. A solar-powered water purifier. I still remembered the way my hands shook during the presentation. They called the winner, Isolde Fry. I had blinked, confused. My name had been on the submission form. She stepped up to the stage, smiling like she meant it. Holding my plaque. My project. My moment. Later that night, I confronted Dad. He waved me off. Let her have it, Kaylin. You've got plenty of time to shine. I didn't. Because from that moment forward, she took every light meant for me. Quietly, softly, I learned what it meant to be replaced. Those moments didn't disappear. They nested, one inside another, until all my victories felt second-hand. I walked toward the edge of the patio, past the table of deviled eggs and store-bought potato salad, until I reached the wooden bench where Mom, Winona, sat with her cardigan folded over her knees. She looked tired, but not in the way age makes you tired. She looked tired of pretending. You okay? She asked, her voice low, like we were in church. I hesitated. Then sat beside her. For a while, we said nothing. Just listened to the drone of second-hand joy. Then she whispered, Your father tore up your army application. I turned my head slowly. What? He didn't mail it, she said. Said you'd thank him one day. Said it was for your own good. I couldn't feel my legs for a second. My lungs took in air, but it didn't land right. You knew? My voice cracked on the second word. She nodded, eyes glassy but dry. I didn't agree with him. But I didn't stop him either. And for that I'm sorry. I couldn't speak. So they hadn't just ignored my ambitions. They sabotaged them. They didn't just doubt me. They dismantled the path before I could take the first step. I'd always suspected. But suspicion was easier than confirmation. Stillness came over me, not numb, but exact. As if everything inside me aligned, painfully, into one clear line. I looked down at my hands, still calloused from drills, still marked by purpose. I thought about all the nights I cried in my barracks, wondering why no one ever called. Why no one ever asked how I was. I thought they didn't care. The truth was crueler, they didn't want to know. I finally whispered, I wonder how many dreams he saved from happening. Mom closed her eyes for a beat. You still became what he feared you could never be. That didn't comfort me. But it steadied something. I turned my gaze back toward the garden. The guests were still buzzing, but none of them looked my way. Gerald was laughing, loud and commanding, as if he hadn't gutted his own daughter's future like it was a favor. It didn't look like a birthday party anymore. It looked like a memorial. For what never got to live. I stood quietly, softly, and stepped off the patio toward the shed behind the house. It hadn't changed. The latch still stuck. The door still creaked. The scent of dust and old wood met me like an old acquaintance. In the far back corner, tucked behind an unused garden hose, was a tin box. I pulled it out slowly. Inside, 2 ROTC medals, still gleaming beneath a thin film of neglect. A dog tag with my last name etched sharp into the metal. And a letter. It was from my first commanding officer. A recommendation letter I never showed anyone. Not because I wasn't proud. But because I knew it wouldn't matter here. I ran my fingers along the edge of the paper. They may have taken the photo. The party. The story. But they didn't take this. What I bled for. What I earned. What I survived. I pressed the lid closed gently. Slowly. Tenderly. Then wiped my hands on my pants. Straightened my back. Rolled my shoulders. They thought they'd kept me small. All they did was feed my silence. The grass felt softer beneath my steps than I remembered. Or maybe it was just my breath slowing down, my body finally catching up to the truth it had carried for years. I re-entered the backyard quietly, my palms still faintly marked by the tin box and the rusted air of the shed. My fingers smelled like metal and memory. The lights strung across the trees glowed warmer now, less about decoration and more like stage lights. But I wasn't a performer tonight. I wasn't here to dazzle or prove. I was here because I was tired of folding into the corners they left for me. Isolde caught sight of me first. "Well, look who's back from the bunker," she called out with a smirk, just loud enough for the nearby cousins to hear. "Didn't know special forces needed to check their makeup too." I said nothing. I didn't break stride. Her eyes searched mine for the old signal, the one that used to say, "I'll let it go." But I wasn't carrying that signal anymore. I had buried it in the tin box. She shifted slightly in her heels. Just a twitch. But I caught it. A ripple of uncertainty. My father stood nearby, watching. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence was his language of choice. Always was. And still, I didn't flinch. Because the silence, it wasn't surrender. It was strategy. I moved through the crowd like a shadow reclaiming shape. People stepped aside without meaning to. Some nodded awkwardly. A few smiled too long, like trying to remember where they stood in the unspoken hierarchy of family loyalty. I didn't stop until I felt a small tug at my hand. "Kaylin," a small voice said. I looked down. Juniper. Her fingers curled around mine, soft and uncertain. "Mommy said you're pretending," she whispered. "But you're not, right?" I knelt to her level, gently, so she wouldn't feel the weight of adult shame pressed down with me. "Do I look like someone who needs to pretend?" I asked softly. She looked at my face, really looked. Then she shook her head. "No. You look like you do the scary stuff." I smiled, small and real. Before I could say more, Isolde swooped in. "Juniper, honey, come help me with the fruit tray." Her voice was sweetened, but tight at the edges. She didn't even glance at me. Juniper hesitated. Isolde took her hand anyway and turned her away. I didn't resist. I let her go. But something had shifted. Because even innocence can feel when truth doesn't match the volume of a voice. I stood and turned toward the house, drawn by something unspoken. My feet moved without asking for permission. Inside, the hallway was dim, the kitchen empty. On the living room wall, the photo display Isolde had curated for the party. Her wedding. Her podcast launch. Her daughter's recital. Charity brunches. Vacations. She had turned her life into a shrine, and made sure no one else's candle could burn beside it. Nowhere in that spread was a single photo of me. 15 years in service. Multiple commendations. No frame. No corner. No memory. I stepped closer. The wallpaper near the edge curled slightly, just behind the display. Instinct made me peel it back. And there, stuffed behind the drywall, was a photo. Me. In uniform. Holding Juniper as a baby. My face younger, eyes softer. It hadn't been destroyed. Just hidden. Not erased. Just buried. I didn't cry. I felt something more dangerous, clarity. "They wanted to make it look like I'd never been there," I whispered. But the wall remembered. I returned to the backyard. The crowd buzzed with smaller clusters now, less laughter than before. More glances. Isolde was holding court again, telling some story about her recent interview with a wellness blog. But this time, when she saw me approach, her voice faltered for half a second. She recovered quickly. "You know, Kaylin, it's totally fine if you want to share your truth. But don't turn today into a political statement." I stopped beside her. Calm. Firm. "I'm done asking you to believe me," I said, my voice low and steady. "I'm not here to perform. I'm not a fantasy to disprove." The backyard went still. A fork dropped. No one picked it up. "You've been rewriting this family for years," I continued. "And I let you." I stayed quiet. I stayed small. "But you don't get to narrate me anymore." Gerald looked up from his plate. He opened his mouth, then closed it. No defense came. I turned to the rest of them. "From now on, you're either silent with me. Or you're in the way." Isolde let out a nervous laugh. "God, you're dramatic." But no one laughed with her. Even Juniper stood quiet, halfway behind her leg, watching. And in that moment, I stopped being the child who asked to be seen. I became the woman they could no longer ignore. I straightened, slowly. The wind caught the edge of the flag Gerald hung every year. For the first time, it didn't feel like it was flying for strangers. I didn't need a response. I didn't need permission. I just needed to stand. I stopped asking to be seen. Now, I'll make myself undeniable. The noise of the party dulled behind me as I stepped off the patio and into the fading light. The air had shifted, still heavy, but quieter now, as if even the cicadas knew to hold their breath. I walked past the string of lights swaying gently in the warm Georgia air and out toward the gravel drive. My shoes crunched softly, steadily. The house behind me hummed with the same sound it always had, laughter that was practiced, smooth, and meant to carry farther than the truth ever could. My SUV sat where I left it, a dark outline against the deepening sunset. It wasn't borrowed, wasn't new, wasn't decorated for anyone else's approval. It was mine. The only thing in this family that ever really had been. When I opened the door, the smell of dust and gun oil filled the air, sharp, clean, familiar. Inside, everything was where I'd left it, the hard case in the back seat, the folded jacket, the worn pair of boots. For a moment, I just stared at them. My reflection glimmered faintly in the window, blurred by the sunset. They dressed me in doubt my whole life. Tonight, I'd dress in proof. I lifted the hard case onto the tailgate. The latches clicked open with a sound that felt like a pulse coming back to life. Inside lay my uniform, pressed, clean, perfectly still. My beret rested at the corner, the fabric creased with memory. The photo ID lay on top, the kind issued only to those who had gone far enough to stop asking where they belonged. I dressed slowly, button by button, buckle by buckle. The fabric was heavier than I remembered. The weight sat across my shoulders like a familiar hand, grounding me. I pulled my hair back, smoothed it beneath the beret. The side mirror caught my reflection in the fading orange light. The face staring back wasn't the woman they dismissed at dinner. It was the soldier they refused to see. The one who stood in deserts they couldn't name, who had watched morning rise over tents and foreign soil, who had earned every scar and silence. I didn't need applause. I needed presence. My fingers brushed over the St. Jude coin in the console. I remembered my mother slipping it into my palm the morning I left for basic. "You'll need this more than luck," she'd said quietly. My father hadn't come to the bus station. He'd said there was no point watching me leave to play pretend. They missed my beginning. But they would witness my return. I closed the SUV door with a steady hand and started back toward the house. The canopy lights looked different now, too bright, too fragile. The laughter faded as I crossed the lawn. I could feel eyes turning toward me before I even reached the porch. Conversations broke off mid-sentence. Forks hovered in midair. The evening folded in on itself, tense and still. Gerald stood first, his hand tightening on the armrest of his chair. His expression flickered between disbelief and anger. Isolde froze beside him, her wine glass slipping slightly, the rim tapping against her bracelet. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The silence did the work. This uniform had walked through gunfire. It had stood in dirt and blood. It had known loss in ways no dinner conversation could grasp. And now it stood here, in the same backyard where laughter once buried me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "This uniform has been seen in places where silence means survival," I said softly. "It will be seen here too, where speaking up has always been punished." Isolde swallowed hard, eyes darting between me and the phone she gripped too tightly. Gerald's face hardened, his jaw set. "This isn't the time for theatrics," he said, his tone low, controlled, the same voice he used when disciplining us as kids. "No," I answered gently, "it's finally the time for honesty." He looked at me, but the certainty in his expression faltered. Years of authority couldn't hide the truth anymore. I took another step forward, the gravel shifting beneath my boots. I didn't need to justify the fabric on my back or the medals they'd never asked about. All I needed to do was stand there, where they could no longer claim ignorance. Someone whispered, "She's real." Another voice, softer, "My God, she really is." I walked toward the family photo wall inside the house. The air conditioning hummed, steady and indifferent. The photos looked smaller now, the frames reflecting the light from my uniform. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old photograph, the one I'd found hidden behind the drywall. The picture of me holding Juniper as a baby. The one they'd decided didn't fit the aesthetic. I placed it in the center of the wall, between Isolde's charity award and her wedding portrait. For the first time, it looked right where it belonged. No one stopped me. Not even Gerald. I was always here, I said quietly. You just chose to decorate around me. A soft click came from behind, someone's phone camera. I didn't turn toward it. I didn't need to. And now, I said, steady and sure, you'll have to frame me in the truth. No one spoke. The room held its breath. The light flickered across the wall, glinting off the photo like a seal. I exhaled, slow and calm. Healing didn't arrive suddenly. It came quietly, softly, in moments like this, when the truth no longer asked for permission. The sound of my boots against the tile felt louder than it should have. Every step struck the patio like punctuation, sharp, deliberate, impossible to ignore. A metronome cutting through the din of celebration, demanding silence not with volume, but with certainty. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't timid. I walked the way only someone can who spent years being erased and finally decided she'd had enough. The kind of walk that says, I'm not asking to exist anymore. Conversations faltered. Then stopped altogether. One last clink of glass rang out somewhere near the bar cart. Then, nothing. Even the crickets outside, their chorus ever reliable, seemed to lose their rhythm for a beat. All eyes turned. Isolde's gaze bounced between my uniform and our father, like she was waiting for a prompt, a cue, a line of defense. Gerald stiffened in his chair, hands braced on the armrests, knuckles white. Winona stood slowly from her seat, hands firm against the edge of the table. Her breath was even. Her stare was steady. She knew what was coming. No one dared to speak. The air thickened, like the moment before a storm rolls in, the kind that doesn't scream but swells until it's undeniable. Somewhere near the drinks table, a phone slid discreetly into someone's pocket. Too late. The room had already changed. And for once, I didn't shrink. I moved past the long farm table. Past the wine glasses and the monogrammed napkins and the dainty name cards designed to preserve the illusion of closeness. I walked to the wall Isolde had curated, her museum of family perfection. The photo wall. Dozens of snapshots arranged in symmetrical rows. Birthdays, graduations, christenings, promotional ceremonies. Smiles polished to perfection. Captions witty and light. Aesthetic unity. Truth, scrubbed clean. I pinned my military badge just above the corner of Isolde's laminated Women of the Year award. It caught the glow of the patio bulbs and held it, quiet but powerful. For the first time, the wall looked honest. My mother stepped forward. Her voice was low, reverent, meant only for me, but loud enough that no one could mistake it. They took your photo down years ago, she said softly. Said it didn't match the party theme. I turned toward her. Met her gaze fully. So they chose to party without the truth. Her eyes glistened with something I couldn't quite name. Pride? Shame? Sorrow? Maybe all three, tangled up in the silence between us. Then came the throat clear. That old, clipped sound. A warning disguised as habit. Gerald. This isn't the time, he said, voice rough. You're turning a celebration into a spectacle. I didn't even glance his way. My voice was calm. Clipped. Precise. Then perhaps you shouldn't have made it a family one. A heartbeat passed. Then another. The weight of every omission, every side comment, every closed-door decision, they were all there, hanging in that stillness like humidity in August. I reached into my jacket. Pulled out a laminated page. Set it down on the table next to Isolde's wellness pamphlets. 2 pages. 2 stories. One curated. One earned. Just in case anyone here thinks I imagined the last 15 years. A quiet murmur passed through the room. Chairs shifted. Someone coughed. A drink was set down a little too fast. Some faces looked away, eyes too heavy to meet mine. Others leaned forward, drawn to the gravity of proof. It was subtle, but unmistakable. One of us told stories. One of us served. Gerald's voice broke first. You could have told us, Kaylin. You could have trusted us to. To what? I cut in. The words came faster than I meant, but smoother than expected. To approve? Validate? Hang a gold star on my collar before dessert? His face tightened. A twitch at his temple. A familiar recoil. You always assume the worst, he snapped. I tilted my head. No, I said. I just remember what happened. Silence. Again. But this time, it wasn't oppressive. It was honest. Isolde stepped forward. Perfume hit first, rich, overbearing. The kind that insists on being noticed. She crossed her arms, chin raised. The smile on her face was brittle, glass thin. You planned this, she said, sharp as glass. You waited for the perfect moment, right when Dad and I were being honored. So you could hijack it. You always had a flair for dramatics. I almost laughed. Almost. You don't need help losing the room, Isolde, I replied. You did that the moment your voice got louder than the truth. Her lips parted, but no words came. For a flicker of a moment, something broke through her facade, fear, confusion maybe, just maybe, the first whisper of shame. From behind her leg, Juniper peeked out. Tiny. Wide-eyed. Her fingers clutched her mother's dress like an anchor. Her voice carried through the air, soft but clear. Mommy, why are people looking at Aunt Kaylin like that? Isolde tried to hush her. But it was too late. Even innocence knew when a story stopped making sense. I looked again at the table. 2 documents side by side. Her carefully constructed image and my reality. The distance between them wasn't measured in inches. It was measured in integrity. This isn't about envy, I said clearly. It's about erasure. You wrote me out of every room and called it peace. Gerald's jaw clenched. That's enough. I turned to him. Not afraid. Not angry. It's never been enough, I said. And you know it. His eyes dropped. He looked away first. The silence that followed didn't feel like avoidance anymore. It felt like surrender. I stood my ground, full uniform catching the last rays of the evening sun. My badge glinted, reflecting back everything they had tried to dim. Mocking me didn't shrink who I am, I said. It only shrunk your understanding of me. A click. Someone's phone captured the moment. No flash. Just quiet confirmation. No laughter followed. Across the table, Isolde's hand trembled as she reached for her wine glass. Her voice, when it came, was soft. Thin. You think this makes you better than us? I looked her dead in the eye. No. It just makes me honest. The words drifted like smoke, undeniable, unshakable. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. When a soldier stands still, I said quietly, it's not fear. It's because the storm already passed through her. The patio lights flickered once. A breeze moved through the trees. My badge caught the light again, casting fractured shadows on the memory wall. In that fractured light, I found something settling inside me. Not rage. Not pride. Just certainty. The kind that doesn't seek applause. Only truth. The silence after my last words didn't end, it deepened. It shifted from tension to something weightier, something that hummed beneath the skin. I hadn't moved, but my body felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. The stillness around me wasn't peace, it was the held breath before impact. I saw movement near the edge of the patio. Tobias Merrick, tall and calm, with the same quiet confidence he'd had in ROTC, stepped out from the shadows. He looked directly at Gerald. His gaze wasn't aggressive, but it didn't bend either. I knew that stance, I'd seen it in men ready to tell the truth, no matter who flinched. Sorry to interrupt, he said, his voice carrying over the table. But Kaylin didn't just serve. He paused, letting the air settle. She outperformed every cadet we had. She outshot me. Outsmarted me. And I was top of our class. The room stilled. The clinking of glasses stopped. The air thickened into disbelief. Tobias's tone softened, but it didn't lose weight. She led when the rest of us hesitated. You didn't raise a liar, sir. You just ignored a leader. Gerald's jaw worked, his knuckles tightening around his chair arm. I could almost hear the gears turning, the old reflex to reassert authority, to twist truth into control. He straightened his back, chin lifting slightly. She hid all this from us, he said. If it were real, why wasn't she proud? It wasn't a question. It was an accusation wearing concern as camouflage. I took a slow breath. Because pride in a room that denies your presence isn't pride, I said softly. It's punishment. He blinked, momentarily thrown by the calm. You could have told us. I did, I replied. You just didn't listen. You wanted stories that fit your version of me, not the truth. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. I stepped forward, the gravel crunching beneath my boots. The motion was deliberate, quiet, steady. My mother's eyes glistened, not with tears but with understanding. I didn't hide, I said. You didn't look. It was the first time I'd said those words out loud. They didn't sound angry. They sounded final. Gerald didn't move. He didn't blink. For a man who had built a life out of knowing how to command attention, he suddenly didn't know how to hold it. I turned away from him and faced the rest of the guests. Some looked at me with awe, others with the kind of discomfort that comes from witnessing something true. I kept my service quiet because it wasn't about ego, I said. It was about survival. I learned to fight in places where applause doesn't mean anything. You survive or you don't. You adapt or you vanish. My voice didn't rise, but it reached every corner of the backyard. And I survived without your approval. From my jacket, I pulled a folded paper, the commendation I had received 2 years ago, signed and stamped. I held it up long enough for the nearest few to see. The emblem glimmered faintly under the patio lights. This didn't come from imagination, I said. It came from 14 months in Afghanistan, 3 in South Sudan, and 2 classified zones where silence meant living another day. No one moved. No one dared to. Gerald looked like a man trying to reconcile 2 worlds, the one he had built and the one standing in front of him, uniform pressed, steady, undeniable. I placed the document on the table beside his glass. You used to talk about honor, I said quietly. You taught us to stand for the flag. But you couldn't stand for your own daughter. He swallowed hard. The sound carried farther than it should have. Isolde turned away, pretending to fix Juniper's braid. Her hands shook. For the first time, I didn't feel small in this house. I felt measured, whole. I felt like the echo of every woman told she needed permission to speak. Someone near the back of the group clapped once, softly, uncertain. I turned my head in that direction. My eyes met theirs. I didn't smile. I'm not performing, I said. I'm existing. And existing, fully, is the thing that terrifies this family most. The clapping stopped. I stepped off the small platform where the photos still hung. The flag Gerald had raised earlier fluttered behind him, the stripes catching light from the patio bulbs. It looked different now, not as decoration, but as mirror. Mom's eyes met mine. She didn't say a word, but her nod was enough. A simple acknowledgement between 2 people who finally saw each other again. I took one last look around the yard. The tablecloths, the plates, the laughter that had once excluded me, all of it now stood under a new kind of silence. The kind that no one could manipulate anymore. This time, I didn't break the silence. I let it break them. Silence doesn't last. It never does. It pretends to. It stretches itself thin across rooms and relationships, masks itself as civility, as grace. But eventually, it cracks. Tonight, it cracked at the edges first. In glances that lingered too long. In whispers passed between half-full glasses of Chardonnay. In fingers twitching toward phones like instinct. It was a quiet unraveling. Subtle, but unmistakable. I've lived through airstrikes quieter than this. But it wasn't me who shattered. It was them. The ones who had carefully laid brick after brick, building their reputations on everything they decided I wasn't. For years, they'd handed out roles like party favors. I was given the quiet one. The one who drifted, who never returned calls, who chose distance over family. They cast me in their version of the truth and expected me to perform it. To nod. To sit still. To disappear politely. And for a while, I did. Out of guilt. Out of longing. Out of some foolish hope that maybe, just maybe, if I played small enough, they'd finally make room for me. But not tonight. Tonight, the play went off script. And none of them knew their lines anymore. I didn't see the exact moment Silas Dean raised his phone, but I heard his voice clear across the patio. Nervous. Uncertain. But determined. This is live, he announced, his voice cutting through the tension like a slow blade. He cleared his throat. There are 8,000 people watching. A pause. Then gasps. One glass clinked too hard against a tray. Someone whispered, "Oh God." The phone turned, and the screen caught the light, just enough to reveal a storm already in motion. The live comments blinked in real time. Protect her at all costs. Her silence was power. She's the real one. Who's the dad? He looks pissed. And then, one that struck like a heartbeat caught between breaths. She's not speaking loud. But I hear her the most. I stood still. Isolde lunged forward, her hand slicing through the air. Silas, she snapped, take it down. This isn't a show. Her voice broke halfway through, cracking like glass. Not from pain. From fear. But Silas didn't lower the phone. He didn't flinch. Even he, who used to mock my quiet exits, my unreadable eyes, my vanishing act at family functions. Even he understood something fundamental had changed. I hadn't asked for the spotlight. But I wasn't shrinking from it anymore. Isolde turned back toward the group. Her voice shot upward, brittle and forced. Okay, she said, both hands raised as if to gather the crumbling narrative and reshape it. Maybe Kaylin's not lying. Maybe she really did all of it. Fine. But why now? Why tonight? She gestured wildly at the patio, at the wine, the decor, the carefully constructed memory wall behind her, each photo arranged just right to erase me. Why ruin our family's moment? Her voice trembled under the weight of her smile. The kind of smile that begged to be believed. I stepped forward slowly. My boots against the stone patio made a sound louder than any yell. My voice was even, almost quiet. But it landed like steel. You ruined it, I said, the moment you decided your version of this family mattered more than the truth. Silence. Even the trees seemed to still. Behind me, Tobias moved, subtle, calm, and handed Gerald a tablet. I didn't need to look. I knew what was on the screen, my military record. Deployment history. Service rank. Commendations. Years of sacrifice, sanctioned, official, undeniable. Proof. Gerald stared down at it. His jaw slackened slightly. But he said nothing. Because finally, after all these years, there was nothing left to say. I turned back to the crowd. Validation never needed your permission, I said. It only needed your silence to end. I wasn't angry. I wasn't demanding anything. I was just done. Done waiting for space at a table that had always pretended I wasn't hungry. The words landed. Not like fire. But like clarity. Across the lawn, Isolde's face began to crumble. Not a collapse, an unraveling. Like porcelain cracking beneath too much light. She took a step back. Then another. Her heel caught on the step just beneath the photo wall, the one where her curated version of our family hung like propaganda, and she stumbled. Wine sloshed over her wrist. A few people moved, slight motions of concern, but no one rushed to catch her. It wasn't cruelty. It was recognition. Revelation has weight. And tonight, it fell on her shoulders. Whispers began to break loose. Not shouted. Just released. She's the one who said Kaylin lied. Did you see the video? It's all real. She laughed when she said it. Isolde reached for a napkin. Her hands shook. Her lips moved, but nothing came out. This wasn't a takedown. I hadn't touched her. I hadn't screamed or accused. I didn't need to. Her world, built on photo captions, PR filters, and curated sibling erasure, fractured not because I attacked. But because I didn't. Because I stood still. And let the truth speak louder than her performance ever had. Some people fall from power. Others implode. I didn't move to comfort her. I didn't gloat. This wasn't about revenge. This was reclamation. Of dignity. Of voice. Of presence. All the things stolen in subtle comments and laughter that excluded, in birthday toasts that skipped my name, in tables where I was seated but never seen. I turned back to Silas's phone, still streaming. Still recording. Still bearing witness. I looked directly into the lens, not to become a symbol. Not to trend. But to finally speak from the space I had fought so hard to reclaim. This isn't about proving who I am, I said clearly. It's about stopping who I'm not from speaking louder than me ever again. The crowd didn't move. They didn't need to. The message had landed. I turned back to Gerald. To Isolde. Not with fury. With finality. You don't get to narrate me, I said, softly. Calmly. Like a verdict being read. Not anymore. I didn't wait for their reactions. I didn't need their applause. I walked away from the patio. From the stage I never asked to be put on. From the version of the family they had crafted to keep me outside the frame. I walked not to flee. But to choose. To choose a version of my life that wasn't up for editing. Juniper watched me go. I caught the flicker in her eyes. Confusion, awe, realization. The beginning of a new narrative. One that would start not with the girl they thought had wandered off, but with the woman who had returned with her voice intact. Tonight wasn't about earning their love. It was about something more sacred. Tonight, I reclaimed my voice. And I wasn't giving it back. The night air had changed. Not just cooler, but heavier. Like the kind of quiet that doesn't arrive with peace, but instead, lingers after reckoning. A hush born not of calm, but of consequence. I sat on the porch steps of the Fry estate, elbows resting loosely on my knees. Not because I was tired, God knows I've run on far less, but because sitting felt like the only honest thing left to do. After everything. After the words that couldn't be taken back, after truths that cracked the house's polished veneer. The crowd was gone now. They hadn't been dismissed. They just left. One by one. Drifting off as if staying too close to the fallout might stain their reputation or curse their inheritance. Even the string lights overhead had stopped performing. They flickered occasionally, no longer dazzling. Just existing. Still lit, but not demanding attention. Like me. I didn't feel victorious. Didn't feel bitter either. I just felt clear. Sharp-edged clarity. The kind you only get once you stop begging to be understood. Years ago, I'd scribbled something in a half-used leather journal during an ops recovery, when the adrenaline wore off, and I was too wired to sleep but too numb to move. When the storm ends, silence isn't peace. It's aftershock. I didn't understand it then. I do now. From the gravel beyond the porch, footsteps approached, slow, hesitant. I turned my head slightly, caught the shadow moving closer. A cousin, I realized. Peter. One of Gerald's sister's boys. We'd spoken maybe twice in the last decade. He always stood on the edge of rooms, watching with the kind of expression that said he was thinking far more than he let on. He sat down on the step just below mine. Not too close. Just close enough to make it known this wasn't an accident. He didn't speak right away. Just stared ahead, elbows resting on his knees. Then he cleared his throat. 3 years ago, my brother's unit got hit outside Kandahar, he said quietly. I stayed still. Listening. Letting him lead. We never found out who pulled them out. All we ever knew was it was Tier 1. Female. Unnamed. He paused. Not for effect, just to breathe. I didn't realize it was you until about 15 minutes ago. Until tonight. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile. I just let the truth hang in the air between us like smoke. They never wanted to know, I said finally. Because if they knew, if they really looked, they'd have to admit they were wrong about me. Peter stared at the ground, then nodded once. His voice was quieter now. My brother owes you his life. I probably do too. He rubbed his palms together. So thank you. And I'm sorry. That part wasn't necessary. But it mattered. It mattered that he said it. I reached over, gave his shoulder a quick squeeze. Just once. Gratitude doesn't need an audience. He stood. No drama. No speeches. And walked back into the night. I sat a while longer. Let the weight settle and shift. Let the quiet change shape. Then I stood. Slow. Steady. Because it was time. The SUV waited just past the farthest string of lights. Parked in the gravel where the night bled into the trees, where the stars had more room to breathe. I reached for the door handle. And then. Kaylin. My name. Not shouted. Not whispered. Spoken like a demand softened by hesitation. I turned, slowly. Not startled. Not afraid. Just patient. Gerald stood at the edge of the driveway. His hands were buried in his jacket pockets, his stance forced tall. But there was a slump beneath his collarbones that hadn't been there before. A sag he wasn't strong enough to hide anymore. You're just leaving? He asked. That's it? No final word. I looked him dead in the eye. No fire. No frost. I gave this family my silence for 20 years, I said evenly. Tonight, I gave you my truth. I took one more step toward the car. You don't get both. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His eyes flickered with something unspoken. Regret, maybe. Or guilt in its earliest form. I saw it, the version of him that wanted to ask me to stay. That maybe even wanted to say sorry. But some chapters don't get rewritten. They end. I slid into the driver's seat. Shut the door with a click that sounded more like closure than anything I'd ever spoken. And I didn't look back. Not because I was erasing what happened. but because I no longer needed to carry it forward. The road was empty as the tires rolled across faded pavement. The headlights carved tunnels through the dark, illuminating nothing I feared. The dashboard lit up, soft blue against the black. A low ping echoed through the cab. Red tear clearance alert. The kind of notification only people like me ever see. A call back to work. To purpose. I didn't flinch. I smiled. Quiet. Certain. Alone in her bedroom. The glow of her phone screen bouncing off her pale face. She scrolled endlessly. Her perfectly manicured nails moving too fast. Her lips tight. The comments kept coming, thousands now. Not curated. Not filtered by hashtags and loyal fan circles. These were strangers. Viewers. People who saw just enough to finally know the difference. She laughed at a soldier. Where was her apology? She used her sister's silence to build a brand. She scrolled. And scrolled. And scrolled. But the likes were gone. The shares evaporated. The silence she had once used to erase me now blanketed her. Heavy. Unrelenting. They used to clap when she spoke. Now, they scrolled past her in silence. Still in the living room. Alone now. He sat in that stiff leather armchair, his chair. The one no one else was ever allowed to sit in. As if it was sacred. As if it meant something. In his hands, the military commendation I'd left behind. He hadn't framed it. Hadn't even read it until tonight. Now, he stared at the words. They looked back at him like a mirror he couldn't escape. Not an accusation, just the plain record of everything he refused to see. Of who I was. Of what he missed. Of who he might have become if he had tried. Pulling into the safe house just past midnight. I parked under the canopy of trees. Left the keys in the ignition. Kicked off my boots and sat on the edge of the bunk. Alone. But not empty. The silence here was different. Not forced. Not shameful. It was earned. I reached for my journal. The one I'd carried through deployments, through loss, through rebirth. The pen moved before I could even think. Like it knew before I did. One line. You don't always get a new family. But you always get a new ending. I closed the journal. Set it down. Looked out into the dark, into the vast, unfinished night. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel erased. I felt written. I woke before the sun. Not from noise. Not from nightmares. Just breath. A slow inhale into a room where silence didn't feel like absence, but choice. The sky beyond the safehouse window was still smeared in that pre-dawn slate, a shade between memory and morning. A quiet blue, trembling at the edges, not yet bold enough to declare itself daylight. I didn't feel triumphant. Didn't feel wounded, either. I just felt level. Balanced in a way I hadn't in years. Like something buried deep inside had finally clicked back into its original shape. No victory parade. No dramatic epiphany. Just the slow, steady hum of peace settling into my ribs. I stretched. The motion felt unfamiliar, like reclaiming a body I'd once leased to survival. My shoulder popped with a quiet crack, loosening the last ghost of yesterday's tension. Healing doesn't perform for anyone. It doesn't scream for recognition. It arrives unannounced, unapologetic, and deeply personal. The clock on the wall read 5:04 a.m. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and reached for the duffel bag that had become an extension of me, part armor, part archive. The same one that had followed me across continents, through customs, through checkpoints, over desert floors and down rainy sidewalks. I hadn't unpacked it last night. Not fully. But now, my hand brushed something unfamiliar tucked in the side flap. An envelope. Winona's handwriting. No goodbye. Of course not. She knew better than to cheapen closure with something as flimsy as words. I opened it slowly, letting the paper tear in that soft, fibrous way that always reminds you something is being broken, gently. Inside, one note, and a folded photo. You were always the one holding us together. And the only one brave enough to walk away. That was it. No signature. No apology. Just clarity. My breath caught, not from sadness, but something else. Something closer to recognition. I unfolded the photograph. There I was, maybe 6 years old. 2 front teeth missing. Wearing a sun-faded red shirt with a ketchup stain I still remember fighting over. Hair tied in uneven pigtails. Clutching a miniature American flag like it was a sword. A 4th of July picnic. In the background, blurred but unmistakable, was Gerald. Already turning his back. Even then, I was standing alone. And even then, I stood tall. I placed the picture on the floor next to my boots. Let it exist in the quiet with me. Let that little girl have her place in my morning. She earned it. At the Fry house, the sun took its time. Isolde had been up all night. Not pacing. Not crying. Just awake. She stepped into the living room barefoot, wrapped in a cardigan 3 sizes too large. Arms crossed so tightly across her chest, it looked like she was bracing for an aftershock. The photo wall was different now. No longer a monument. Not quite erased. Just quieter. Half the frames were missing. No one had announced their removal. No ceremony. Just absence. And still, the wall spoke. Me. In uniform. Centered. No plaque. No lighting. No fanfare. Just presence. Isolde stood in front of it. Motionless. She didn't sob. She didn't shout. She just stood. The silence didn't feel tense. It felt sacred. Like the kind of quiet you find in old libraries or art museums, where things are allowed to speak without being interrupted. She didn't say the words out loud, but I felt them. When you erase someone long enough, what's left behind haunts you. In another room, Gerald sat with a creased paper in his lap. My military commendation. Thumb smudged. Folded. Worn soft at the edges from being handled too late. He'd read it the night before. But today, he understood it. Winona walked in, handed him a mug of coffee. Black. No sugar. Just the way he always said he liked things, bitter and unadorned. He didn't thank her. He didn't look up. And for once, he didn't offer an opinion. Because sometimes, silence is the only language truth respects. Later that morning, I drove. Winding roads, old roads, the kind that don't show up on maps but always lead you where you need to go. Outside town, past the power lines and overgrown fences, I parked on a small hill. There's no marker here. No stone. No grave. Just an old oak tree, its limbs stretched wide like arms that had always been ready to catch me. The kind of tree whose roots go deep enough to hold whatever you need to let go of. I stepped out. The wind was light. The sun barely warm. I pulled a single item from my pocket, a dog tag. Worn so smooth over the years, you could barely read the engraving. It had rested against my chest through storms, combat zones, and quiet betrayals. But it wasn't just a nameplate. It was an identity I had once reshaped, rewired, and shrunk, just to make myself palatable to people who never really wanted to know me. I knelt by the base of the oak. Dug a small hole with my hands. Fingers in the dirt. The way roots welcome memory. I placed the tag inside. Some parts of us aren't lost, I whispered. They're laid to rest. With honor. I stayed longer than I meant to. Watching the sunlight filter through the leaves, scattering shadows like fragments of old versions of me, finally dissolving. I didn't cry. I didn't pray. I just breathed. Stillness isn't what happens when the world quiets down. It's what happens when you choose not to invite the noise back in. By midday, I was back at the safe house. I sat on the hood of my SUV. Barefoot. Eating crackers from a crinkled sleeve. The radio hummed low with some classic rock station half lost in static. The sun was full now. Not harsh. Not blinding. Just real. And this time, I didn't feel like I was hiding from it. I belonged to it. My phone buzzed gently beside me. A message. Winona. Home isn't where they welcome you. It's where you no longer need to prove you belong. I stared at her words. Let them settle. Then opened the Notes app, hovered over a reply. Deleted it. Instead, I reached for my journal. Leather-bound. Scarred. Opened to a blank page. Wrote. They didn't take my name. They just forgot how to say it with respect. I closed the book. Let the silence hold me. And whispered, perhaps to no one. Or maybe to everyone. And now I only answer when it's said right. Healing doesn't always wear a cape. It doesn't arrive with fanfare. It's not a movie climax. Sometimes, healing is a pre-dawn sky. A silent walk. A dog tag buried beneath an oak. It's choosing not to explain yourself anymore. Not because they finally understand you. But because you've stopped needing them to. So I'll ask you this. Have you ever had to walk away just to finally be heard? If this story reached somewhere deep inside you, subscribe. Because maybe the next story we tell will be yours.